Hi, my name is Miriam Abbott, and I want to share a few lessons I've learned about leadership from writing a column called Business Briefs. I think as we open up, it's fair to ask me, what is Business Briefs? Business Briefs is a column I started, towards the end of the pandemic, when I noticed that in popular media, most business advice comes in the form of anecdotes and interviews, and there's very little that you'll find that cites current research in business practices and in leadership practices. And in fact, there is a lot of helpful research out there. So I pitched a column about the research to my bosses, and the publishers at Metropreneur and Columbus Underground thought it would be a great idea. So what I do is I take academic articles that are written for a postgraduate audience, so heavy vocabulary, and they look something like this, and I distill them into something that's reader friendly. Sometimes I offer analysis, and I'll look at something like a sample size and note if it's really small, like 7 people, or really huge, like 4,000 people. Other times I just let the numbers speak for themselves. I always include in every article a link directly to the original study so the reader can access the information and view for themselves whether or not it's reliable, whether or not the information is something that they can use in their own practice. But from writing this column, I've found that there are emerging concerns for leadership. Notably, there was a white paper that featured a series of 25 surveys and studies about leaders. And what they found is that when you survey leaders, they estimate that about 80% of their time is spent on tasks that are meaningless and don't make a difference, right? And that's kind of a hard realization when you're trying to make change, make something happen. They have also found that despite the fact that there has been a doubling in investment in leadership development across the board in our culture, faith in leadership has declined 30%. So we're spending more money on developing leaders, but the outcome is that people are having less faith in their leaders. And the last statistic cited in this white paper that was alarming to me was that 2 out of 3 leaders would like to not be managing people. That they would like to be doing something else, which is remarkable to me, particularly because I think leaders should be leading people. So it brings me to a conclusion that our current climate that integrates a lot of aphorisms and motivationals about the importance of leadership, that's not supporting leaders the way it should be. And that maybe there are things in the research that are more helpful that we should be leveraging. So with that said, I have 5 cool data points that I think can make a difference in leadership success. So data point number 1 involves future-focused feedback. A really cool study looked at the feedback from 419 executives, and the initial part of the study took that feedback from 419 executives and characterized it as here's what you did this year. So the executives looked at the person's accomplishments from the last year and gave them feedback on how good it was. And the researchers found that if the feedback was positive, the recipient of the feedback was like, yeah, that's right, I'm awesome. If the feedback was negative, the recipient thought that there was something that was kind of misguided about it, that it didn't quite connect. So they weren't really receptive to negative feedback. They then followed it up with a study of executive feedback that was future focused. That is, the executive said to the recipient, what I need you to do next year is to be on time for meetings. What I need you to do next year is to prepare for the transition. So what I need you to do next. And they found that when an executive's feedback was future focused, told someone what they should do next in the future, it was associated with the recipient having much higher intentions to change, saying to themselves, I can do that. I will do that. So future-focused feedback is one way to lead people towards change. Data point number 2 is that somatic conditions count. And I don't usually like to use unusual vocabulary words without explaining them first, but I think the context of this study will help. They looked at, researchers looked at 106 independent workers, so people who worked without supervision, and found that those who were the most productive were also ones who exhibited signs of the most self-control. So on surveys, when they asked them about things, they tended to be types of people that you would say had a high level of self-control. That's not a surprise, right? People with high levels of self-control can be expected to be more productive. The interesting thing about the study was that they found that people with a high level of self-control typically altered their semantic conditions around which their work took place. I still haven't explained the term semantic conditions. I'm going to now. Semantic conditions are conditions in which we find ourselves. So, for example, if I have a high degree of self-control and I want to get work done today, one thing I might do is designate a workspace, right? So I'm picking this place where I will work. I might comb my hair. I might put on my special work clothes. And the reason why I have a picture of a shoe here is because I know what my semantic conditions are. For me to get work done, I have to have shoes on. So think about semantic conditions in terms of a path to improve productivity, or at least support productivity. It seems to have an impact on how we get things done. Data point number 3 is that virtual meetings are wastelands. This finding came from a study of 602 people, and they were assigned small work groups. Some worked in a virtual meeting context, others did not. The teams that worked in a virtual meeting context had fewer good ideas when assessed and fewer ideas overall. It just didn't get as much done than the groups that worked in person. I'm not condemning remote workspaces because the study gets more interesting the more you read it. And the researchers didn't condemn virtual workspaces either. What they noticed is that the people who worked in virtual meetings, they tracked their eye gaze, and their eye gaze was always on the screen. It was always like this, right? Because that's what we're expected to do in a virtual meeting. We're expected to look at the screen. But when you watched people work not in virtual meetings, the other groups that had the good ideas and a lot of ideas, their eyes were all over the room. They were thinking all over the place. And researchers think there's something about the virtual meeting context and our maybe expectation of ourselves to look at the screen that hampers good creative thinking. So think about different modes for working with people that don't involve so much eye contact. Data point number 4 is beware the jargon speaker, which we probably intuitively know when someone uses a lot of jargon and euphemisms, they may be making those word choices to obfuscate some kind of truth. But one research study involving 200 participants suggests that there's also a reason to be careful around people who are just fans of jargon. So in that study, researchers presented to their 200 subjects series of phrases, some of which were meaningless and some of which had meaning. When it came down to the sort of person who thought that the meaningless jargon was profound and somehow important, the researchers found that those particular participants had less skills in terms of problem solving, but at the same time estimated their problem-solving skills to be much higher than the rest of the population. So they don't have a good perception of their own limitations, and they have a lot of serious limitations. So beware of those who subscribe to jargon. They tend to see things that are not there. Finally, data point number 5 is the one that is the nearest and the dearest to my heart, because I think Building trusting relationships is truly the core of leadership. Research suggests that in the workplace, it doesn't matter so much if I, as someone who works, trust my colleagues. Okay. That trust doesn't affect how I view my workplace. It's whether or not I trust my leader. That relationship, my trust for my leader, is the most important feature of building a psychologically safe workspace. What is required to have trust in a leader? Well, based on a literature review of 25 years, not 25 articles, 25 years of research in business and leadership, what's required to trust a leader is that that leader have integrity, that that leader have benevolence, and those are both moral virtues, things we usually think of when we think of trustworthiness. But something else is also essential, is critical, and that is that that leader be competent. So it's not good enough to have good intentions. It's not good enough to be kind and consistent. You have to get the job done right. And if you're not competent, if you cannot cross your T's and make sure everything is done right, then you cannot maintain the trust of your community. One thing that I always like to say, though, is don't believe me on these things. Look it up for yourself. You'll find a link to business briefs in the presentation description. You can go there, and those will be my words, right? So, but at the end of each column, you will also find a link directly to the research, and you can access it for yourself. If you have any questions or want to talk and brainstorm more about this, I encourage you to contact me. I love to talk about this stuff.